Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. It seems forever that I've done a video specific for YouTube, for you guys. And, well, here it is. It has taken a while to get through all of the Chris Watts material. And by the way, there is actually a movie coming out, a Netflix documentary. I think it's already out in some countries. I know it's already out in the UK, and that is something I'll also be analyzing. I'll sort of do an introductory analysis on YouTube and then the rest onto Patreon. But for today, it's quite exciting. There's been very little information about Lori Vallow in terms of what she's like as a person. And I mean from people that aren't her family and people that aren't somehow have a horse in the race, if I can put it that way. So although we've found a certain amount out from Melanie Gibb, a certain amount from Charles Vallow, who was ultimately shot to death, a certain amount from neighbors, we're getting a clearer picture of who she is from a woman who spent 4 days in jail with Lori Vallow. Now, if this woman was ever to testify, you would tend to have a scenario where her testimony would be disregarded or undermined in lieu of the fact that she herself is or was in jail for whatever reason. And you had that same scenario in the Patrick Frazee case, where a jailhouse snitch spoke about Frazee's hit list and all that kind of thing. I don't tend to support those kind of arguments. In other words, I don't support the argument that the person making the claim, if they're a criminal, it means that they're lying. I think it does have value, and you can base it on your own intelligence, how much value it does have. So in this case, the snitch isn't accusing Laurie of anything, although she does seem to be quite sure that Laurie had something to do with the disappearance / death / murder of her children. I mean, that much is clear. That's not really surprising, and in any event, I think that kind of shows that the snitch isn't an idiot, and isn't trying to manipulate people in the other direction. So I'm going to start off by looking at the tabloidy article in the New York Post, referring to Laurie as a doomsday cult mom, and that the headline is that she's upbeat in jail and likes media attention. And this came out yesterday in the New York Post. Now, the fact that she's upbeat behind bars is interesting. It shows that to some extent that Laurie is an optimistic person, that she's trying to be positive and so on. One doesn't kind of get that sense from Letitia Stalk, for example, that one doesn't get the sense that Letitia's upbeat. We kind of get more of a cynical sense from her, and there's just been news now that she wants to have herself reevaluated in order to, I guess, question whether she's competent to stand trial. And so if you're talking about competency and sort of attitude in jail, you can see that Laurie is far more upbeat and positive and all those kind of things than Letitia. And quite an interesting question is, who do you think is more realistic here? Another interesting contrast is someone like Chris Watts. What was he like in jail? And we know that he had quite a rough time. He was relieved when he was able to go to Dodge Correctional, and I personally believe that that was part of the plea deal, is getting him to sort of a reprieve from the sort of nightmare situation he was in, where people were advising him to kill himself and shouting at him and all that kind of thing. Now we get a little bit of this with Lori Vallow as well, where she compared, this is in terms of her discussion with Missy Cook, that is the name given to this anonymous snitch by East Idaho News, quite an interesting name. But they basically say that that Laurie said to Missy she was so relieved when she was able to get out of the Kauai Correctional Center. I'm not sure if that reference to the Kauai centers in the Daily Post article, but it certainly is in the other one. In any event, before we get started on the Daily Post analysis, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. Thank you to the 400 or so who've subscribed in the last couple of days and weeks. Thank you for joining True Crime Rocket Science, and just bear in mind there is an extension to the YouTube channel on Patreon where there's quite a lot of analysis, and I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about that at the end of this episode. But for now, let's get started. So just scanning through the New York Post article, it's sort of interesting that most of the discussion, just sort of glossing through it, most of the discussion is sort of about things like makeup and toenails and dry skin and how she looks and all that kind of thing. And you kind of get the sense that it is from a woman's perspective, if I can put it that way. If there was, say, a male prison warden, and I'm not sure whether that is allowed, but if there was a male prison warden, I would imagine the observations and the discussion would be very different. I always find it fascinating when certain people who are in high-profile cases like Lori Vallow, who find themselves in the spotlight, and they literally sort of thrive in it. They revel in it. They love it's like a warm glow that, and they love the attention. And it's interesting because you have that with certain criminals, but not all of them. So certain criminals that seem to enjoy the attention included Casey Anthony. Someone else who enjoyed the attention was Amanda Knox, and I think she still enjoys the attention. And then there are those that don't enjoy the attention. I'm not saying Nicole Kessinger is a criminal, but she is someone who clearly doesn't enjoy the attention. Chris Watts didn't enjoy the attention either. But there doesn't seem to be a sense that of sort of scandal or humiliation or embarrassment that they are where they are. There doesn't seem to be a sense of shame or hiding the face. There seems to be almost a sense of glee, that they are somehow separate than the rest of us. Maybe we've all just misunderstood what has happened. But what I'm trying to say is, like Jodi Arias, for example, loved to give interviews and also wanted to do her makeup. And things like that play into the dynamics of the crime itself. Certain crimes took place because the person felt they weren't getting the amount of social credit or acknowledgement that they felt they deserved. And maybe the person that is murdered is murdered in order to make that happen. In other words, to remove this obstacle that is preventing them from getting the attention and validation that they want. And in the Jodi Arias case, we kind of saw that with Jodi Arias felt invalidated with Travis dumping her and taking someone else on holiday. And so by killing him, she's addressing her social status in that. And of course, the media attention did that far more. And she, I think, really enjoyed it. And there's some people who enjoy being in court. They enjoy being in court. They look at how many people are in court. The more people in court, the more important they are, and all that kind of thing. And so you actually do have a case where Laurie is comparing the news coverage of herself to the coverage of Kobe Bryant to some extent, and also COVID-19 and saying, wow, I'm actually more important than a pandemic. And so you can take that thing of wanting attention and you can apply it in a way to certain motives and certain driving forces why you would do something. So that same thing where you say, well, Laurie likes getting attention. Well, if you're a god figure, if you're the head of a cult, you're also going to get that kind of attention. And, you know, somebody's saying to you, did you know that you were like some kind of famous mystical figure in the past and you actually are destined to be my wife and we're going to lead this incredible army of doomsday survivors. Wow, I'm going to get all this attention. I really like it. In other words, it's the difference between being insignificant and invisible and weak and pathetic and poor and having nothing and being significant. And for some people, just being the focus of attention matters more than what that attention actually is. In Amanda Knox's book and in some of her disclosures, she talks about watching herself on television in prison. And although in some interviews and there are some instances where she seems to say that she's unaware of it, there are others where she seemed absolutely caught up in it. And we know she wrote a book. We know she was on TV a lot afterwards, and she still is very much in the spotlight almost annually. And so you get these people who they just love. It is a way that they feel not only alive, but a sense of social power. And if you've never had it, or you felt like you've never had enough of it as a younger person, when you do get it, it is quite an amazing feeling. And so the Snitch was basically saying that Laurie was saying, well, I'm the lead story. There's me. I'm more important than all that stuff. And the mirror to that is that at a certain point, Laurie didn't feel very important at all. I don't think she felt important in her marriages. I don't know if that had to do with her husband or more with her, the kind of person that just feels insecure, that feels unhappy, that wants more, that wants to be more. So obviously the question on most people's minds are, you know, how would Laurie respond to, you know, the issue of her children, you know? And so that is the question that really needs to be asked. And another question that we sort of have in our minds right now is, will Laurie take the stand? And I think the answer is, if she doesn't throw Chad under the bus, I don't see her taking the stand. I also don't see Chad taking the stand. I could be wrong. Just in a very, not knowing too much about the details of the case in terms of the legal things, the legal side of things, I would imagine their respective attorneys would advise them not to say anything, allow the prosecution, the burden to fall on them, right? But if Laurie throws Chad under the bus, then I think she will testify. I think she will have to. In any event, the Snitch says, I made a point not to ask about her kids. I wanted to gain her trust and see if she would tell her anything. And I don't really get the feeling that worked. I don't get the feeling the Snitch really found out anything of significance. Of course, it wasn't a very long time, 4 days, but even so, I don't think the Snitch really found anything of use. I mean, in a legal sense, something that she could have given the prosecution or something. I also think if she had something of use, she could probably have gone to the prosecution, and the prosecution would have said, don't talk to the media, because it would have been contaminated in the media, and she would then not have necessarily have been called as a witness. So that's another thing that'll be interesting, is will there be other snitches that are going to come forward, whether in terms of Chad or in terms of Laurie. So now we get a little bit more into the dynamics of Lori Vallow as a person, and you get a sense of her vanity, not a sort of a ordinary level of vanity, kind of a level of vanity that the snitch noticed. And she said Laurie seemed very concerned about being camera ready for her court appearances, and you know, because she's aware that it's getting national attention, she wants to look her best. And it's quite a interesting thing. You might think, well, wouldn't anyone else do that? Wouldn't anyone want to look their best in court? And Chad certainly looked fairly snazzy. You know, he's got a tie on. He usually looks quite sort of clean cut, you know, hair combed and all that kind of thing, quite neat and so on. But you don't always have that situation. In the Oscar Pistorius trial, Oscar appeared to be kind of messed up. I wouldn't say he was untidy, but he looked disheveled. He looked like he was going through a rough time, and I think that was intentional. And you do have some people who go to court and they intentionally look kind of like victims. We saw with Harvey Weinstein, he's sort of almost like a cripple. We saw with Cosby, you know, like he's blind kind of thing. So some people go to court not trying to look their best, not trying to look more attractive than they really are, but actually trying to look different in certain ways. We know Casey Anthony kind of dressed up in a way that made her look conservative. Same with Jodi Arias. And so it is a little bit strange that Laurie would try to make herself look more attractive. And you could see how this could potentially blow up in her face if she continues with that. You could have a situation where Chad's attorney might say, look how attractive Laurie was. Chad made some mistakes. He was in love. You know, Laurie was sort of maybe out of his league, and he was in love, and or not in love, infatuated. And because of that, he wasn't thinking straight, and he doesn't remember things and all that kind of thing because of this attractive woman that he was with. In a way, turning Laurie into not just a scapegoat, but into kind of a manipulative kind of person, and more than that as well. I'm just saying this thing trying to make herself appear attractive could actually blow up in her face. Whereas if she presented herself as a victim, it could show her to be a victim. I'm not saying that she is a victim, but you might get the sense that between Chad and Laurie, Laurie is the victim here. Laurie was duped by Chad or something. And it is still a question that we're asking ourselves. Who was duped by who? Or were neither of them duped? So there's some detail about when the news would come on, Laurie would say, here it comes, here's my story, turn it up, let's see what they say about me now. And what that shows you is that Laurie is paying attention to the news, especially regarding herself. And this is something that I think is very misunderstood in the Chris Watts case and underestimated. I'm not saying that Chris Watts did the same thing, that he would say, hey guys, the news is on, turn it up, put it on. I don't think that he would be like that. Would he take an interest in it? I'm sure that he did. And I'm talking about around the plea deal, especially subsequent to the plea deal between November 2018 and February 2019. And what I'm trying to get at is that Chris Watts isn't like not thinking or not doing anything, or not still trying to defend himself, or not still trying to strategize. Every day he would be talking to his family. They would be telling him what someone has said on a blog or on YouTube or in the media, and then they would talk about it amongst themselves. And obviously one of the things that came out was this video over Christmas, over the December period, of the shadows in the driveway. And then is it such a surprise that when the agents went to see him, that not only came up with them, but he knew about it. He was already aware of it. And so in the same way that the agents gave Chris Watts, sorry to be conflating this case so much with it, but in the same way that the agents gave Chris Watts the idea to blame Shanann, it didn't come from him, it came from them. He can also get ideas through what is being said in the media about him, right? And on social media about him. And so you can see these ideas. Maybe he did that. Maybe he did that. And maybe it's believable and there's no evidence either way. He might use that, hijack something like that to use in his favor compared to what the real story is, if we can put it that way. And now you have the same thing with Laurie and Chad. Laurie and Chad will both be looking at what is being said in the media about them and to some extent learning from it. And I wouldn't be surprised if what I've said here about their appearance is going to fall on ripe soil with one or both of the attorneys, where they're going to concentrate on the appearance of their respective clients, either where they're going to cooperate and they're both going to bring about the same appearance, or there's going to be a difference. And you might see something like Chad appearing to be sort of disheveled, unshaved or something, and that he's really struggling in jail and that he's having a hard time. And, that he's actually the victim here, that he was manipulated by Laurie, and that maybe if you do sentence him, he's already suffered, so sentence him to less time, something like that. Do you see where I'm going with that? There's a lot of choreography and acting and dressing up of when there's a court case. The whole thing is actually a performance. And it's a performance to a jury of 12 people. The jury are going to either be emotionally connected to the people on trial or not. And that's another question. How do you emotionally connect with the jury? And, one of the ways in how you dress is to say, I'm trustworthy. What I'm saying is true. I'm not a bad person. But another way to get that response is by being the victim, by looking like you are very sensitive, by looking like you're suffering, by looking like you're not a strong person, and so someone else sort of did you in. And so as far as I'm concerned, I think Chad and Laurie both are not very strong people. But they found strength in one another, and they found strength in their beliefs. Not real strength, not authentic strength, but a kind of strength that they felt served them better than whatever they were getting in their respective marriages and in their respective lives. And look where they are now. The interesting thing about Laurie not being downbeat now or regretting anything is it shows she obviously still believes what she believes. What's also interesting in the article about Laurie in the New York Daily Post is her discussions with her son, Colby. And she says that she kind of uses a biblical reference telling him that she's being tested like Job, or you might say Job. And she overheard Laurie saying, and this is quite significant, she overheard Laurie saying, Colby, just listen to me. Everyone wants to know, but it's none of their business. God doesn't judge me, and they shouldn't judge me. The prophet says to stay off social media, so don't go on there. And so it's quite an interesting response from Laurie, which is God's not going to judge her. Wow, that's interesting. So God's not going to judge her, but he's going to judge the world and bring about doomsday. I mean, isn't doomsday ultimately judgment? I mean, it's called Judgment Day, but God's not going to judge her based on what she's done. And other people shouldn't judge her, and the court shouldn't judge her. And what about, should the judge judge her? And so this whole thing about, you know what, actually no one should be judging me, and I can go to court with my head held high and there's a purpose to everything, and maybe the whole world is going to, you don't know this, but I'm speculating. Maybe Laurie has the idea that the whole world is going to be changed in terms of her story trumping a global pandemic, and that is how she's going to still become the leader of this preppers thing, this preparing a people. Maybe she sees this thing where she's been incarcerated as identifying her to the masses to say, this is the one, this is the chosen one, and this is how it is actually happening, and it's all for a reason. It's all God works in mysterious ways. And of course, you might actually imagine that could be true until it isn't true, until she gets sentenced and the world continues not to end. But she apparently did say to the snitch over and over again, everything has a purpose. God has a plan for everyone, and his plan will be accomplished. So she firmly believes that everything is still going according to plan, as the Joker said.
Because it's all part of the plan.
And I think it makes sense that Laurie would be still caught up in this idea that it's all still happening. Because, you would imagine if she was aware of one family member of another, quote, disappearing, unquote, one family member after another being killed, not in that order, like first becoming a zombie, then becoming killed, but basically being murdered, then if she's aware of that, and after each time that happens, her beliefs don't change, you can imagine how they're not. What is going to change them? Like what on earth is going to change her beliefs? I think one thing that could change her beliefs is if Chad throws her under the bus, and if he has said to her, "You are my divine bride for eternity. You were this and that, and our love is eternal," whatever. And then he throws her under the bus. That's going to be quite a betrayal, but it's also going to prove that it was all bullshit. I can understand, and I agree with the snitch who said when she spoke to Chad, it was nauseating to listen to him. To listen to her, that she would primp before their video chats, and she kept wanting reassurance from her husband that he loved her. And she also said that she talked to her son almost 2 days straight, just like constantly talking to him. But the thing about her being nauseating, I got that impression from the way that she spoke to the police officer in the body cam footage. Just the way that she said things, it was also nauseating. She spoke about, I don't know if you remember, she spoke about the insurance and how she was done in. I found that pretty nauseating. Just a way that you can see that the New York Post is a tabloid publication. I'm not sure if this is news to a lot of people, but maybe some people listening from elsewhere in the world. But when you have an article calling someone a hubby, that's that is very tabloidy. It's not very professional. Anyway, what is interesting is the snitch noticed that she was taking notes while she was talking to Chad, and I think what that is telling you is that her taking notes is like she's still following orders, essentially. Before we go on to the East Idaho news, the final thing I want to just mention is that the snitch noticed that Laurie had a sunny disposition and was friendly. She never noticed her crying, and she never seemed disappointed. You can interpret this in two ways. The one is that she's got a front that she puts forward, and you also see that with putting on the makeup. But the other thing is that is how cracks appear in a person, is when you defy reality inauthentically. In other words, you keep putting up the sunny side, And meanwhile, things are getting darker, and time is ticking by. And bear in mind, she's now going to be in a situation where it's going to go into winter, and as winter approaches and Christmas approaches, so is her court date. And some part of her's got to start doubting. Some part of her's got to start wondering what Chad's doing. Some part of her is going to start wondering whether she still loves him and whether she still believes everything. And vice versa, also with Chad. And so I think there's got to come a point where her doubt is going to possibly be overwhelming. And I think that may well happen in the final months, like November, December, as the run-up, as the pressure of the trial mounts. It's also possible that in her encounters, in her conversations with Chad, that there might be an argument, that somewhere along the line he says something wrong, as happens with so many couples, or she says something to upset him, and that pushes over the apple cart. So it may not be an independent thing. It might be the emotions that are already there lead to someone saying or misstating something, making a Freudian slip, and then that leading to a break in their relationship, but also in their joint approach to the charges. What I also think is going to put pressure on both Laurie and Chad is the story. When Chad reads about the story, he's going to get a sense that Laurie is being watched. There's someone eavesdropping on her. The sense that things aren't secure. There are people that are overhearing what they've said, and this may really upset him. This may also feed into feelings of doubt and commitment. Okay, so now we go into the East Idaho news story. And they referred to her arriving in Rexburg on the 5th of March, a Thursday, from Hawaii. She had been arrested on counts of desertion and non-support. And she'd refused to cooperate with law enforcement until then. She'd also stayed mum pretty much when the media approached her, didn't have anything to say. And this also gives us another side to Laurie. You might say, well, she's sunny side up. There's nothing is going to get through to her and make her feel, like she wants to give up or change course or something. But clearly what is going on in the prison, in the jail in Hawaii, got to her. She said, it's months later, and she tells the Snitch that the jail in Hawaii was so bad that there were cockroaches on the floor. And it is kind of funny how prisoners talk about how nice a particular jail is. You heard Chris Watts saying that, and now Laurie saying the same thing about Madison, just saying that the food's amazing and it's so great. And the way that it is described almost makes you want to go there. Well, I also want to go to jail because the food's so good. I'm not going to go into the details about the makeup and trying to improve her appearance, except to say that one of the ways that you test someone for narcissism is the amount of vanity, right? So I do believe that Laurie is quite a vain person. She does care a lot about her appearance, more than just a normal, healthy caring about your appearance. And I think that excessive amount of vanity feeds into narcissism. And I also think that same narcissism is in the whole idea of, did you know that you're actually a god? Oh, really? I can actually see that. That is someone who's susceptible to narcissism. I'm talking about beyond the average narcissism. Chad, I think, has a totally different. I don't think Chad is a vain fellow at all. He certainly doesn't have any reason to be based on his appearance. But I think he has his own kind of narcissism in a different way. I think it is what he thinks he deserves, what he sees himself as, or sees how he can portray himself, is, I think, quite narcissistic. And I do think, although I don't like to use labels like this, I do think narcissism is more relevant in this case. So Laurie mentioning the book of Job and about being tested, that is clearly how she sees what is going on now. It's probably something Chad has told her. Don't give in. This is a test. God's watching. God is watching to see how you handle this test. God has actually given you this test, and me, and that's all it is. It's just a test, and so that's all you've got to do is just it's almost like outlast the test. Don't stop what you're doing. Don't just keep the faith, because that's all that this is. It's not a murder trial. It's not that you are in prison. It's not that you're in jail for something you've done. All that this is a test, which is another way of minimizing something. So another thing that Laurie and Chris Watts have in common is this turning to God while in jail, and I think that is something that's almost a cliche, and I think it really does have a soothing effect. I think it really does work. The whole message of the Bible is about hope, that you have hope to transcend your circumstances on earth, and that you can have this fairy tale life in the life ever in the afterlife. And so that's quite a nice message to think about when you've got nothing else to think about. It's quite a nice message to think about when you are surrounded by four walls and things are very bleak and boring. You have this idea of this afterlife, and I think that as a metaphor of also the after prison life. You're going to have a life after being in prison, whether it's on earth or in heaven. But it's the same sort of thing, that you're going to have your trials and tribulations and so on. Of course, it's a selective reading of that. It is not talking about accounting for your sins. There might be something about account your sins to God, not to man. Okay, great, I won't then. But even the Snitch says your only comfort you're going to get is to pray. I'm sure she's praying a lot. So in that sense, it is possible that Laurie may not crack. She may actually become a more devoted cult figure than she already is, than she already was. So coming to the end of the East Idaho News article, there's also quite an interesting section in there about the daily routine, the chores they've got to do when they eat meals, what happens around that, their head count and all that kind of thing. Remember when Chris Watts was interviewed, one of the things they asked him was, are you available to talk to us? And then he said, well, I don't know if this room's available. And they said, well, don't worry, we booked it out. And then they said to him, you may need to go to lunch. And I think that was at about 11 o'clock or something, fairly early. You may need to go to lunch, and they do a head count there, and then you can come back. And that is what happened. But what is interesting towards the end of this article is that Laurie says everything has a purpose. God has a plan for everyone, and his plan will be accomplished. So she clearly feels, like I said earlier, that this is all part of the plan. That all that this is a test. It's not a serious situation. She's not going to spend decades or a really long time in jail. It's just a little short seasonal blip on the radar, and it's part of God's purpose. In other words, the penny hasn't dropped that she's done something wrong and now she's in trouble. I'm talking about she's done something wrong in the real world. In her world, she still hasn't done anything wrong. She hasn't realized she's done anything wrong. And people are coming round, as I said, by watching on TV, they're realizing she's this spiritual leader, and she and Chad, maybe this is how God is going to achieve his purpose. This is how he's going to achieve his plan. by everyone watching them in court. It is very interesting to me, and this again is at the end of the article, where the snitch says, I think she will turn against Chad. In other words, I think Laurie will turn against Chad. If she's as vindictive as she is, I'm not quite sure if that's a typo. I don't know if she's as vindictive as he is, or if she's as vindictive as I guess she thinks she is. Those kids were buried on his land and at his house. I would turn on him to save my own ass. So the snitch is saying, if I was her, I would turn on him. But the snitch isn't her. I do think that, and this is my opinion, that's all it is, I do think that Laurie is actually quite vindictive. I think she was vindictive to Charles, and I think she was vindictive to her children, where they became zombies at the tip of a hat. And so I do see that. The thing is, I also see that with Chad as well. I think what happened to Tammy, liquidating her in order to get life insurance, I also think is vindictive. So I see them both as vindictive. And so you may not have a situation of, will the one turn on the other? Will the one or the other turn on the other? But why won't both of them turn on each other? And if that does happen, that will certainly make for a sparkling criminal trial. I mean, it's already looking to be a fascinating, just from a legal perspective, a fascinating trial. Okay, we're more than 40 minutes in. I'm not going to take it further than that. For those interested, I have covered the Dateline documentary in 6 separate episodes on Patreon. Those who've watched them got quite a lot out of it. So if you're interested in the true crime rocket science analysis of that, a lot of it covers Melanie Gibb, by the way. Then head on to Patreon. It's patreon.com/TCRS. In terms of the Watts case, I will leave you with this, but it has to do with the coverage of the Lindstrom interview and analysis along those lines. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.